walk uphill for an incredibly long amount of time until you're sweaty and you're exhausted and you feel horrible. And then you get to this campsite, and then you put everything down, and you set up your tent, and then the bugs start to bite you. And then when you can't take it anymore, you go in your tent and you try to sleep, but the sunrise comes up and there's no blackout curtains, so it wakes you up and really early, and then you walk back. What's not to like? I mean, it's amazing. We love it. It doesn't make any sense, but we love it. And there was something that occurred to me on this hike that I had never really noticed before. But we would take these breaks along the long hike, but I never wanted to put my pack down. Freddie would take a pack down more often than I, but she often didn't either. We would sit there with these incredibly heavy packs on and have some water and a snack and a little breather so we could keep going. We didn't take our packs off, and I started to reflect at one point, like, why aren't we taking our packs off? It seems logical to. And what I realized is when you take your pack off, you realize that you feel horrible, like your shoulders really hurt, and it's getting rough on there, and your waist, and there's like bruises starting to form, and your blisters are starting. And so it's like a demonstration of this amazing human capacity that we have to be in the middle of crisis and completely ignore it. We can have all these things brewing in our lives, you know, whether it's in our bodies or it's like a personal issue or some emotional thing or some belief that we have that's not working for us anymore. We can have these crises in our lives, and we have a miraculous power to pretend that they are not there and to tell ourselves and convince ourselves that these issues are not there. I think I've realized that for a lot of us, we don't have a whole variety of problems. We don't have 99 problems. We have a few problems, but we just repeat those problems over and over and over again. Do you know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. It's like we have the same fights with our parents or our kids or our spouses or these friends. We have these same bad habits that we fall into again and again. We have the same pattern of having an idea about how we're going to start this new goal and commitment, and then the same pattern of it just disappearing, like almost exactly right on time. We have these same issues that we fall into again and again and again. The same self-shaming often occurs with these problems. We start to think, what is wrong with me? How come I can't fix this thing? I've been here 10 times before, 100 times before, and nothing seems to change. We do this not just as individuals, but as a society. We're looking around at the problems in our country right now, and most of these things are not new at all. The incredible racism and police brutality in our country, the exploitation of the rich towards the poor, the misogyny and patriarchy, these are issues that we have faced again and again and again, and we keep telling ourselves that they are not actually there. I had some harsh but important awakenings during my sabbatical, this 3 months off. It was, you know, like I told you, there were some great moments, and in the beginning was like, woo, vacation, I have time to myself during the day. This is crazy, I can do anything. I can watch a movie, I could go on a walk, I could call a friend, you know. My friends were like, why do you keep texting us? You never respond to texts. These are like my friends from back home, like far away. And they're like, what's, and I'm like, I'm on a sabbatical, I'm trying to write a book. And one of my friends is a writer, and he's like, oh yeah, like all I do all day is try to find ways to avoid writing. That is my biggest goal. So him and I just texted like for 3 months, basically. During this time, you know, there was a lot of joy and there was a lot of connection. I sort of reinstilled some spiritual practice, which was really good, that I'd gotten out of, and that I'm kind of following through on. That feels great. But there were these patterns and these habits and these things about myself that I started being unable to ignore anymore. It was like these crises that I were just pretending were not there. In that space and time of a sabbatical, I started to realize that I had to address them. It's like sometimes we go so fast, we have this breakneck pace in life, and we think that we do have a lot of commitments. We are busy a lot of the time, but sometimes that busyness covers up things that we do not want to pay attention to. It's like the busyness can be a crutch. So there was all these things kind of going on with me at times that I was just being forced to examine by having a space and time. And by the way, that's kind of what Sabbath is about. There's all these stories about Sabbath in the Gospels, or the stories about Jesus, where he's confronting his fellow rabbis, like other religious authorities, about Sabbath. And I've always thought those were kind of like weird, old-timey stories about some religious idea that it wasn't relevant anymore. But often what it was is these folks saying like, no, the point of Sabbath is we have to honor God and we have to sort of follow the rules. And so often there are these spiritual riches and practices in our traditions that religious authorities get a hold of, and instead of allowing them to liberate people, it becomes a tool to control people. And so that's kind of one of the themes that you see again and again in Jesus' teachings. It's like, there's so much good stuff in our story and our tradition and our experience. If we could just get away from the way that the authority structures, the institutions have changed them to control us rather than to free us, something good would happen. And what Sabbath is often, one aspect of what Sabbath is really about, is the chance to take a break from the breakneck pace of our lives and do some real honest examination of where we are and how we live and what we believe, so that we don't get haunted by theological ghosts, and that we don't get haunted by kind of behavior ghosts, these things that we cling on to that don't make sense to us anymore, but that we can't get rid of because we don't even recognize that they are there. So I'm in the middle of this thing in the sabbatical, and I go through this kind of hard time right in the middle where I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with me. But luckily I was writing a book on the mystics. And almost every single mystic, particularly in Christianity, but you see it in a lot of other traditions too, knows exactly this experience. The reason that they are these famous people is because they have come through that experience, and it has taught them something that they begin to share with other people. And that's often the kind of the heart of what they're talking about. So two of my favorites are this kind of dynamic mystical duo, Teresa de Avila and San Juan de la Cruz, or Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint John of the Cross. They were these Spanish mystics in medieval times, and they worked together and they wrote together, and they tried to understand their mystical experiences together. So I'm not going to go into a lot about the art of this wonderful sculpture by Bernini, but it's on your front page. This is called the Agony of Saint Teresa. And it's interesting, if you kind of look at the picture, you look at her face. Oh, nice work, Josh. She is having this mystical kind of union experience with God, and it's called the Agony. But she looks like she's in agony, but not totally. She also looks like she's having a good time. And it is both agony and ecstasy to go through change experiences. It is both agony and ecstasy to really confront the Spirit of God and to change. It is so good. We need it so bad, but it is so hard at the exact same time. So these two used a lot of metaphors to talk about going through rough moments in our lives. They talked about the dark night of the soul. They talked about the season of purgation. And they talk about this phrase, the crucible of love. And I like them all, but the crucible of love really stood out to me. This idea, you know what a crucible is? Let me explain that. You like chemist here or anything? Science people. A crucible is like a mortar and pestle. It's more like a Seattle Crunchy version of it. You know, it's a bowl, and a crucible is where you put different metals inside, and it gets really hot inside. And if it's done well and the crucible is made right, then you can create a metal alloy, which is much stronger than either of the two metals are on their own. And part of that is that there's a process of releasing the impurities in the metal. We have to get it really, really hot in order to make it happen. Mortar and pestle is like a little bowl, and you take a thing and you kind of grind some stuff up so you can get to the good spices inside. And so they talk about the crucible of love. They talk about the importance of going through crucible experiences in our lives as part of the spiritual journey, but they also show that it doesn't always go that way. Just going through something hard doesn't automatically bring us into a better place. And so I took some of what they wrote. This is my fancy, I'm not used to the TV yet, so I'm still using the whiteboard. And kind of combined it with some of the other mystics that I was studying on this break, and that I've been studying for a decade. And can y'all see this, sort of? And talked about a little bit of the anatomy of a crisis. And this is kind of a mystical anatomy of it. And so what happens in our lives is crisis builds. And for a lot of us, we just stay here for an incredibly long time, and we don't deal with it, and then it can explode, and that's a huge problem. But at some point, the crisis builds, and something changes in our life, or we take time, and suddenly we fall into this unknowing and anxiety, where we realize that the patterns that we have, the behaviors, the thoughts, the ways of being and thinking in the world aren't working for us, and we fall into this kind of messy, hazy place. And then that leads us into this crucible experience where the anxiety builds and we don't know what we're going to do anymore. And so we're in that crucible moment where everything seems really, really hard. And I'm not here to say, just a caveat, that crucibles are awesome. They are awful and agony, and they can lead us to really good places. So we can be in these crucibles, and I'm talking about the toxic relationships we have. I'm talking about the things that we chase after that don't satisfy us. I'm talking about the beliefs we have about ourselves that just kind of tear us down, or the beliefs we have about other people. Those are those crucible things where those become really relevant to us. And there's sort of two places to go from there. Most of us go this route, into shame. And shame is the experience of saying, there is something wrong with me. This crucible, this thing that's not working, that's frustrating me, I suck. I can't win. I can't do it. I'm a failure. I'm a loser. I am not lovable. It is my problem. I made this happen and I should be able to fix it. And so to try to fix it, we punish ourselves. We go into self-punishment because we think there's something wrong with us. And so the just thing to do is to punish. And so we kind of get mad at ourselves. We hurt ourselves in some way. We come up with these patterns that are going to save us. But the problem is it's all based on our ego. Both the problem is like ourselves, and the solution is supposed to come from ourselves. It's like our willpower, our desire, our strength is supposed to be the thing that's going to save us and that's going to change everything. And so then we get into this pattern because in fact it is not enough. Maybe it's different for you, but I don't think so. And then we kind of come up with this new theory or scheme, and we end up back up here in the crisis builds, and we just kind of go in this thing again. And we can go in this pattern for like a bunch of times before we ever move into this other area. So this is the place that we want to be, according to mystics and my life, and probably many of you can agree with this. Instead of going into shame experience, we can fall into this experience of grace, which instead of saying there's something horribly wrong with me and I suck and I have to fix it, is to surrender and say, I'm not perfect, and yet I'm loved anyway. Grace is the experience of God loving you, of accepting you, of embracing you, not because of what you've done or the goodness in your life, but just because that is the nature of the universe and who God is. And in this experience, we are able to not place all of the problem in ourselves. We start to recognize that there are more issues at play than just our own behavior and just our own lack of willpower and just our own, righteousness. That there are environmental structures at play that cause us to be the way that we are. There are other people and situations that build this in us. And also that there are other places of solution. That we don't have to find all of the strength and the freedom in ourselves to start something new. Grace isn't just about ourselves. It is about realizing that there is something greater that holds us. And when we can do that, we get kind of past the ego that kind of expands to everything. It's not just narcissists that have an ego problem. It's also like most people are narcissists. Most people are full of shame and think that there's something wrong with themselves. But that's sort of an exercise of ego as well. It's still all about the I. That I am the one who did it and I am the one who solves it. And grace helps us break out of that and realize that our ego is real, but it's like this big. This big, Kara says. I say, how much do you think I love you? And she goes, this much. I go, a little more? She goes, this much? And we do this thing. And then I say, this much, and I say, it's bigger than that, and it's as high as the sky. And that's, I think, how God loves us. It's like, bigger than that, it's high as the sky. And when we experience that, there's this smile on her face because she realized that although I was mad at her because she just won't stop smacking her sister, she's a baby, that even though I'm mad at her in that moment and she needs to stop that, that I love her anyway, And there's this freedom in that experience. There's a joy in that, and there's like actual possibility for some amount of change or resurrection. I think we think about Sabbath and these kind of moments of break in our lives simply as times to refresh or renew. But there's a huge problem with that because it's like, I need to go on vacation because I'm so exhausted so that I can have a little more energy to exhaust myself again until I go on my next vacation. Like that's how kind of capitalism teaches us to behave with our time and our money. Instead of realizing that it's not just about putting fuel in the tank so we can keep driving until we're empty of fuel again. It's about creating a whole new vehicle that doesn't rely on this, I'm getting into the fossil fuel weeds here, but there is an alternative program here. Resurrection isn't just about kind of renewal and kind of keeping going till you're exhausted. It's about becoming a new person. It's about having new desires, new sources of energy and drive and joy and purpose in our lives. But to get there, we have to kind of go through this agony and this ecstasy of that crucible experience. I don't think that the way out of crisis is only through self-mastery. Kierkegaard was a Danish mystic and kind of the father of existentialism, and he said that walking is nothing but a continuous series of falling. It's like, it's definitely, you watch Juniper walking, you'll see that is walking. We just make it look better. I think he actually left something out, though, that it's a continual series of falling and being caught. It's not just falling, and we can do that in our lives. We can just decide to just fall and flail and kind of smash into the ground. That happens too. It's a series of allowing ourselves to be caught and allowing ourselves to fall, because we can also stay here and say we're too afraid to take the next step because we have to fall into that unknown and into that anxiety, and so we stay where crisis is. Jesus started the Sermon on the Mount, this like profound ethical, moral vision of the way that life can be, by starting with this thing of the Beatitudes, which is the kind of the poem of blessed are the poor, blessed are those who hunger, blessed are those who work for justice and peace. And the term blessing in kind of common use, hashtag blessed, is all about like, something good is in my life. And we can think about a blessing that way. But the deeper kind of biblical meaning of blessing is that God is with you in this. So God is with those who hunger. God is with us when we mourn. God is with us when we are afraid, and when we feel lost, and when we're struggling, and when it seems like our heads are going to explode. That Jesus is saying that God is with us in those moments. We fear the crucible and we pity those in it. But adversity is where character is born, and where integrity is strengthened, and where a deep power and resilience emerges from. Kind of as an aside, but liberation theology isn't just about turning over social categories and economic and political categories out of pity for the people who don't have a lot, because they should have enough, and some kind of abstract idea of equality. It's about centering the voices of people on the margins because they actually have some wisdom and some character and some experience that everybody can benefit from. It's not just kind of this noble thing for people with power to sort of try to equalize things. It's like recognizing that other people have some deep wisdom that the world needs. So the challenges of our lives, when we realize this, can become our greatest teachers. Adversity can be something that we don't fear so much anymore. We might know it's going to hurt, but it's something that we can begin to embrace if we believe in grace, or if we're willing to throw ourselves into grace. It's not always easy. Like the Beatitudes isn't something that I always really believe. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who hunger, for they will be filled. I look around and I'm like, what about people who are hungry and they don't get fed? What about people who mourn and they don't get comforted? Like, there is a reality here in the world that sometimes just makes me cynical and not want to take that fall. But when I am at the deepest point in that crucible, or when I'm surrounded by love, those are the moments when I can begin to kind of break out of that cynicism and realize that my despair is still kind of rooted in this ego, thinking that I have to be the one to solve it, that I have to be the one to master myself and save myself. It's those moments of real grace and connection when I can throw myself into that crucible, into that falling experience, and know that I will be caught. So my prayer for us is that we may learn not to fear the crucible. We all end up at times there. Instead, may we allow ourselves to fall and to be caught. I pray that you can look at the shame in your life, the self-punishment that you practice in some way or another, each one of us. And we can take that thing that we clutch and we can ball it up and we can just throw it into the trash. I pray that we can surrender to grace and awaken into resurrection. May the crucible of love release a new era of wisdom and integrity and power in us, in this community, and each one of you here. Amen.